welcome to another edition of the Halloween version, Cavalier family. Now, if you did stay tuned for last week's episode, I do know that last week's was a couple of days ago. We're kind of off as far as release dates, but that's all because of Hurricane Ian coming through Florida and wreaking havoc. Fortunately, our location didn't really get damaged so often. We did have to throw away some chicken wings, so that sucks for football nights. But besides that, we are fortunate enough. We did lose power, but we got it back not the same day that the hurricane went through us, but the following day, the Friday afternoon. So we're gracious that God was looking out for us and being able to provide us the AC before it got too hot out. However, our hearts and thoughts go out to the families during that day and the day after, because there were those, and still even till this day, that do not have power to their house and completely lost their house too. If you look at some of the images of the houses of before and after on that coast, it is crazy and ridiculous. So hearts, thoughts, prayers go out to all the families who are affected to that. Of course, this week, as every week, we want to thank Kevin Holmes, who's done many of the visual elements, Justin Dye, aka To the Stars We Return, who's done many of the audio elements to it, as well as, of course, researchers as well. Do a bang up job. This month, of course, like I did last week, it's going to be a little different. And what I mean by that is it's all Halloween based themed. So kind of want to spice it up a little bit for you guys. There's no exact year for it, as it is holiday. And if this goes over well, then we'll probably do it again for Christmas too. Do it the same concept, same way. And as all the stories and all the episodes go, I will be sharing my personal experience as far as when it came to paranormal. If you listen to last week's episode, I had to deal with my grandmother, her house, and her house in Portugal. Very scary stuff, especially growing up. These are a few elements of what I experienced as far as growing up as a kid. They're pretty scary, actually. So when I go through them and when I talk about them, I still get goosebumps because it brings me back to that space that I don't really like to explore that often, only because it is quite frightening. So we'll go ahead and start off with that, and then we'll go ahead and go into the cartoons. So like I said, last week it was about my grandmother's house. Now, a few things about the houses I grew up in. If you don't know, already described on how I grew up in a house in Dowagiac, Michigan. This house, actually, I'm going to start and back it up to my elementary school, like kindergarten period. I lived in a small city outside of Dowagiac, Michigan, called Niles, Michigan. And I lived on a street called Division. And the house is right next to the playground area, that area. Now, I remember growing up as a kid, getting tucked in. There was one moment where I woke up and it was weird. It was very weird. I looked and I noticed that there was like a hologram version of me. So this hologram version of me was really weird. I still to this day, I don't know what it was or what it could be. And I told my parents at one point, and my mom didn't believe me because I went to their room and I was scared that somebody was in my room. And they said, it's your imagination, blah, blah, blah. And no, like if I remember it to this day, there's got to be something there. So I went back to my room and I walked over it. Now, the whole time, to give you guys a little perspective, this thing, whatever it was, this hologram of myself, I guess, it was looking at me direction of my bed, just boom, right there. And when I walked into the room, it was still there. I have no idea what it was at all. Um, and I'll probably have to watch something after telling the story after this episode. But I walked over, went to go touch it, technically, and my hand went directly through it. So needless to say, I went to bed that night just totally over the covers, like under the covers, that whole thing. And of course, in that house, there are very moments where I remember that I woke up in my parents' room bed. I have no idea how I got there. I wasn't a sleepwalker at all. Both parents will agree I was not sleepwalker. They both said that, they didn't pick me up. So then how did I get there? Now, again, people will say, oh, you slept walk, you got up, you just don't remember. No, like I was dead asleep and I woke up and I was in between them. I don't know how that happened. And there are many moments where, when I was sleeping in the room as a kid growing up, I would hear stuff downstairs on the first floor. And it was like rackets, it was walking, it was moving. It sounded like plates were breaking type situation. And it was scary because we did have cats, and a lot of people are like, oh, the cats climbed on the counter, blah blah. No, the cats always went down into the basement when we grew up every single night in that house. Put the cats down in the basement so they wouldn't climb on to the counters or anything like that. So how do you explain that one? I know a lot of skeptics will say whatever they want to say, but unless if you actually experience something like that, you'll find people being skeptics. But truthfully, that it's truly something else. And that is part one of what I experienced at my house. Of course, Ro and Kevin will be on later episodes, so I'll definitely tell you about the house I grew up in Dowagiac through my high school years, as well as the house I grew up college-wise down in Lakeland, Florida, because there was experiences there too. But if you guys have any stories, let us know. Again, this is a Halloween episode, so we want to make sure that we want to hear your stories. If you want to come on and tell us your story, let us know. We'd love to have you. We can even throw in a special, video out there where it's us and discussing your story specifically. Could be a recurring thing. You never know. So leave a comment below to let us know if you do have a story, and we'll listen to you. We'll share thoughts. We'll share certain things. We'll get spooky with you, I guess. But with that in mind, let's drop in to our Halloween special. And just like that, we're going to jump into the best animated horror series. This was from ranker.com. Some honorable mentions was Beetlejuice, The Real Ghostbusters, Attack on Titan. Don't know how that would be scary, but I've never seen it. Todd McFarlane's Spawn. Real Monsters, which was on Nickelodeon. So number one actually goes to Courage the Cowardly Dog. Scored 8.3 out of 10 on Cartoon Network. It aired from 1999 to 2002. If you don't know about the series, it is an offbeat adventures of Courage, a cowardly dog who must overcome his own fears to heroically defend his unknowing farmer owners from all kinds of dangers, paranormal events, and menaces that appear around their land. It was created by John Dilworth, starred Marty Grabstein as Courage, Thea White as Meryl, Lionel Wilson as Eustace. Fun fact is that Quentin Tarantino is parodied as the zombie director Benton Tarantella, the first appearance being in Courage the Cowardly Dog, Queen of the Black Puddle / Everyone Wants to Direct. Next fun fact is that the show ends on a downbeat note. The Fog of Courage was made to raise interest in reviving the show and ends on a lighter note. The last fun fact that I didn't actually know is Courage is actually supposed to be a pink beagle. I had no idea. Number 2 goes to Scooby-Doo, Mystery Incorporated. Did score 8.1 out of 10. Went from 2010 to 2013 on Cartoon Network. Like all Scooby-Doo, it is about the gang attempting to solve creepy mysteries, except this one takes place in the town of Crystal Cove, a place with a history of eerie supernatural events. It was created by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. It starred Frank Welker as Fred, Mindy Cohn as Velma, Gray Griffin as Daphne, and, of course, my personal favorite actor, Matthew Lillard as Shaggy. Some of the honorable voice mentions is Patrick Warburton, Lewis Black, and Gary Cole all have done voices from time to time. One fun fact is that this is the 11th and longest Scooby-Doo series ever made. There were a few episodes that mimicked scenes from The Shining and Twin Peaks. According to series producer, the head writer, Mitch Watson, while the series was only planned to have 2 seasons, he had discussion with Cartoon Network about a potential 3rd season. He elaborated that the unnamed 3rd season would have been a remake of the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? From 1969, only for the gang to be surprised by unexpected changes in the timeline. The season was never made, as Warner Brothers chose to follow a more humor-focused tone for this follow-up Scooby-Doo series, while Watson went to work on Beware the Batman in 2013. Number 3, I do know is a fan favorite. I've never seen it, but it is Castlevania. It scored 8.3 out of 10. It did air from 2017 to 2012, or no, 2021. A little typo there, on Netflix. Now, if you don't know, it is based on a video game by Konami in 1986. Platforms that you could play it on was obviously the computer, the NES, which is the Nintendo Entertainment System, arcade. You could play on a Game Boy Advance. Of course, that came out later, but they did make the version for Game Boy Advance. A Commodore 64, an Amiga, and DOS. Per Wikipedia, players controlled a character named Simon Belmont, a descendant of the legendary vampire hunter who enters the cast of Count Dracula to destroy him when he suddenly, probably meant castle of Count Dracula, to destroy him when he suddenly reappears 100 years after Simon's ancestor vanquished him. Some of the other games within the series is, of course, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, which is actually a prequel, and Super Castlevania 4, which was released on Super NES, so Super Nintendo in 1991. Of course, TV show, similar to exactly the game. It's a vampire hunter fights to save a besieged city from an army of otherworldly creatures controlled by Dracula. Creator was Warren Ellis. If you know who that is, he's the writer of the movie Red, Iron Man 3, and Red 2. It did star Richard Armitage as Trevor Belmont, James Callis as Alucard, Alejandra Reynoso as Sifia Belnids, Theo James as Hector, and Graham McTavish as Dracula. Series is based on 3rd video game, Dracula 3, Dracula's Curse. Based on the map shown in the series, the city of Grezit is located where Sibiu lies in real life. With a 79% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, Castlevania became the first ever adaptation of a video game to not get a Rotten score, which is 59% or lower. It's also the first anime Netflix series. Number 4 looks like to be, let's see. Actually, you know what? Yeah, no, that's number 4. Okay, my apologies. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. It scored 7.7 out of 10. Cartoon Network from 01 to 07. It's about ill-tempered Grim Reaper gets into a wager that forces him to become the lifelong companions of two scheming youngsters after he loses. The creator was Maxwell Adams, starred Greg Eagles as Grim, Richard Horvitz as Billy, and Gray Griffin as Mandy. The spooky, droning gibberish played in the end credits in a creepy voice is Maxwell Adams saying, "No, no, this is the end of the show. You're watching it backwards." All because the audio is played backwards. In season 3, episode 13, so this fun fact, Wishbones, the truck with which the bunny tries to run down Puddin', is actually Optimus Prime from the 1984 Transformers. At the end of each episode, you see Billy, Mandy, and Grim as cards. They're actually the major arcana from a tarot deck. Billy is the Fool card, representing naive, carefree, and without fear of consequence. Mandy is the High Priestess, representing inner power and feminine strength. Of course, Grim Reaper, Death card. Last but not least, number 5 is Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Scored 7.5 out of 10. It was on ABC from 1993 to 1999. The popular cult horror comic book from the 1950s are adapted in this cartoon anthology series. Starred John Kaser as a Crypt Keeper, Elizabeth Hanna as the Old Witch, David Hemblin as the Vault Keeper, Stuart Stone as the Boy, and Tara Strong as Jenny. Which, of course, you know Tara Strong because she's been mentioned on countless of episodes here. It's fun fact is it's child psychologists had to prove the scripts to make sure they weren't too scary for kids. That's always a good thing, right? John Kaser reprised his voiceover role as the Crypt Keeper in the version of the adult-oriented HBO show Tales from the Crypt in 1989. The pilot episode, While the Cat's Away, is amongst other episodes in the series that's based off of DC comic stories of the 50s. So actually, it was at EC. It's probably EC Comics. So that's what it's typed here. But there you go, guys. That is the not only scary experience when I was younger. Again, you guys will have more next week and a lot more stories because it won't be just me. As well, of course, we will be discussing the top Halloween soundtracks of all time. So you don't want to miss it. Just hang tight. We love you guys. Thank you all so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.